Greetings and salutations. You are listening to the Into the North podcast, where we take a look at the competitive side of the Commander format, also known as CDH. I'm one of your hosts, Lyndon, aka Noobzors, and today I'm joined by my co-host, Reed, aka Sick Robot.
How are you doing, guys?
Morgan, aka Spleenface.
What's up?
And unfortunately, there will be no Matt, aka Null, this week. He is feeling a little under the weather, so we're going to be moving on ahead without him, and we're wishing him the best. So in this episode, we're going to be covering how to brew in CEDH and how to feel good about it. And so without further ado, let's jump into housekeeping. So Morgan, do you want to
sure.
cover this item?
This episode's probably coming a little soon after the one before, but if you remember, we sort of slipped a little bit in October, and we're still catching up, so this is part of that, and we're going to get back on track and get back on our 2-a-month schedule.
So there's a bit of
just not do an episode.
Yeah, there's a bit of a scheduling issues with special episodes. We kind of initially planned to do those almost once a month, but
or like every other month at least. But it sort of got.
Turns out trying to get those things scheduled is harder, and then we've had some technical difficulties with one of them. So we got it recorded, but one person lost their audio track, or just got corrupted with just something we've experienced before. But yeah, so we're gonna have to re-record that episode eventually. Yeah, so we're gonna try to figure out the special episodes. Just might not be as frequently as we had hoped for. Yeah, we'll make sure we're keeping to the 2 episodes per month, even if they're regular episodes. So yeah, sorry about that little mishap in October. Anyways, new developments. We've got a nice post on Reddit from Redshift. And since it has the H word in it, Hulk, Reed, you're going to cover this one.
Oh, yeah, sure. Redshift on every Discord ever. I don't know. Made a pretty great Reddit post the other day about dealing with Hulk. Tips about handling it. Mostly from the point of view of a cast player, but it also has just a bunch of great stuff in there in general. If you play against Hulk and you don't want to have to spend so much effort trying to think about how to play against Hulk, great guide, bunch of good info in there. I would check it out. It's also coming from Red, who is a very prolific shuffle and breakfast pilot. Sorry. Plays the decks a lot and also happens to maintain the cast consult stable / base list. So a lot of perspective coming from both sides of the table in this one. So would suggest checking it out. We'll link it.
Yeah, very, very valuable information here. And I guess this is we've got this listed under new developments, but not super relevant to CEDH, but Morgan.
Sure, yeah, it's kind of relevant to CEDH because I've seen a lot of people discussing this card because,
yes,
I mean, okay, if Oko is the best card in every other format, shouldn't he be the best card in CEDH?
You just gotta try harder.
I mean,
we have to make him the best card in the
Oko
format.
is dominating Standard, it's well represented in Pioneer and Modern, sees play in Legacy, and apparently in a Vintage tournament we got to see a Black Lotus attack for lethal.
Sorry, excuse you, an Alpha Black Lotus attack for lethal.
Attack for lethal.
That's an expensive elk.
But in CEDH, despite people really seeming to want to put him in decks, I don't think he goes in most decks.
I think the closest we could probably get to that is a Candelabra getting elked and beating someone to death. Right?
In what?
In CDH?
LED? Maybe?
Yeah.
Is LED more expensive than Candelabra?
You're talking about money-wise.
Just money-wise.
Yeah, I was like, LED is kind of close to Black
well,
Lotus.
the closest to an Alpha Lotus getting elk real quick.
Probably a candle.
Probably a candlestick. Maybe a tabernacle that got awakened and then somebody turned into an elk.
But Oko in CEDH, I've seen a lot of discussion on this. In CEDH, instant speed interaction is way more valuable because you have 3 opponents. Being able to commit it as late as possible is important. And also, with 3 opponents to attack him, he's just not that survivable. So the only deck I've thought that he could work in was Tassiger specifically, because you have such easy access to something that blocks 3/3s rather effectively, and you are trying to play that long game, shutting off people's commanders, like elking a Thrasios over and over again. Seems...
Oh god, I'm so not looking forward to people jamming Oko and just elking me.
But don't just start putting Oko in decks because he's good in other formats.
It's there's I think we've covered this before, right? But like there's a difference for card evaluation in this format versus almost any other format, because
For sure.
4 people is a lot different.
Yeah,
All different stuff going on.
I was actually reading an article, so it's not just that Oko's taking over every format. You know, there's some top tier pro players who are saying that Oko is the best planeswalker ever printed, which, I mean, kind of, you think, God, this card is so boring, right? It's got like just a +2 to make a food. What the hell is a food? How is a card that says food on it, make a food, the most powerful planeswalker, right? It has, +2 make a food, +1, beast within almost, and like a -5 to do a little switcheroo, but that is not why it's so powerful. But they're saying it's the most powerful planeswalker ever printed just based off the fact that it's seeing play in all these formats and having high impact. Now, I saw that he said in the article, and this was a pro player, that it was also very powerful in Commander. It kind of just made me realize, that maybe your skills at evaluating, modern, standard, and vintage legacy, that doesn't necessarily carry over to
transfer over particularly well.
Because I wouldn't say even in like casual that Oko comes close to even being the strongest planeswalker in Commander.
I wouldn't say it's like the strongest planeswalker in Commander by any stretch, but like I would say that like it's probably a lot better in casual than it is competitive, just because like it's like a fairly unanswerable thing early and turns off people's commanders. But yeah, like they're still like way better.
Yeah,
I mean, I feel like the lower bound of the power level curve on what's the best planeswalker in Commander, you have to get to a pretty high power level before the answer isn't Ugin.
Yeah,
yeah.
And then you're looking at stuff like, potentially Teferi,
Narset,
yeah,
Ashiok,
Nissa,
potentially.
Nissa, who shakes the world, Nissa Vital Force. Those were both insane. Mana doubler Nissa and the one that alts.
I feel like those are still like
level?
very I feel like those are very outclassed by Ugin at like every power level except for.
I still think they're stronger than that dude. Okay, being outclassed by Ugin is it's debatable in the sense that Ugin is much better in decks that need that effect because they don't have access to it in their colors. So if you're like mono green,
what color has access to exile everything? That's not Ugin.
Well, I mean, just like generic board wipes, like merciless eviction, and the white board wipes.
In mid-power, Ugin's good in any deck that can cast it.
Yeah, would agree.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're not a mid-power podcast, so unfortunately, as much as I'd love to turn this,
as much as you'd like to be with Matt.
Yeah. Think about it. Then we could actually put Into the North in our decks. It'd be great.
Oh god, it's in every one of my mid-power decks. Yeah. So let's move on. And the fact that I'm not allowed to mention mid-power for this episode of Brewing is going to hurt.
Yeah.
But I'll try. So yeah, let's get into the main topic, and that's how to brew in CEDH. So I'll kick things off actually. So that's. First little subtopic we've got going on here is coming up with an idea. So this is you're getting at your little notepad, you're brainstorming all your ideas, you're just writing down names of cards, you're going on Scryfall, you're looking up legendary creature, and then you're just picking random stuff and you're throwing cards in it to make it CDH, right? That's how we're doing it?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, effectively. I mean, My Scryfall searches, they were a bit more refined than that, but sure.
Okay. So
At a
then
base form, yes.
How do you refine your Scryfall searches? How do you come up with an idea for which commander you want to pick?
Well, I mean, that's sort of a hard question, right? That's just basically inspiration. It's
Well, I mean,
just
so
being creative.
I think there's sort of two approaches that you'll often see. One is you have a commander with a very unique effect, and you decide you want to brew around that commander. And that's a good starting place, just looking at commanders that, clearly lean you in some sort of unique direction. The other way you can sort of do it is you can come up with an idea for the deck. You want to run some combo or some, you want to run some set of hate pieces, and then you go looking for a commander that supports that.
Yeah, you're in Sans Red. Wow, guess what commanders work for literally any deck. Yeah.
But I think that the key is, if you want to make a CEDH brew, is you have to come up with something that this deck is doing better than the existing options.
Yeah. And it's not even necessarily like something that is like necessarily a big thing that it does better, but I feel like you should like be hitting on an idea that like this does something better or something more uniquely than existing options.
I'm going to actually fight back on this. I don't think you necessarily need to have it be better in some aspect. There's plenty of, viable or decks that would be viable that are just eclipsed by, better commander pairs. So, for instance,
but I mean,
you could
like
build
brewing in general.
You could build a like Sultai Mimeoplasm or Sultai Damia deck, right? Those are going to be like on the very fringes of viability. But you can, Mimeoplasm can kind of do reanimator stuff pretty uniquely. But let's go with Damia.
Single card combo with Entomb.
Yeah, let's go with Damia, because Damia is one where it's basically supposed to be a value engine in the command zone, except it's super expensive, so it's just outclassed by Thrasios Tymna. So you could
it's also just outclassed by
but I don't
Tassiger.
think that's necessarily true. Like, I think you're taking a very narrow definition of what it means to do something better. Like, what if you wanted to play a value engine commander, and you also wanted to play, like, obviously they're not Clasms in black, but, like, those, Massacre, and, like, you wanted to generally keep the board clear of creatures. Like, that could be an option there. Like, that's
okay. This might be a good counterexample to specifically Damia, but that's not really the point I'm trying to make here. The point I'm trying to make is that there might not be a case where your commander has some super unique aspect that you can kind of build into, or that you're not trying to build into that with your commander choice. But that doesn't mean it's not something worth exploring as a brew, just for the sake of being a hipster or trying to maximize, throw people for a loop by having a different commander, or just flex your brewing skills.
So this is sort of actually what I was talking about when I wrote that parentheses into the title of "and feel good about brewing," is because I feel like in order to be satisfied with a brew, or to like feel good about building a deck and putting 100 cards together, and not just at the end of it thinking, wow, why isn't this in this commander instead? Why am I not just playing 5 color with this instead? Why am I not just doing whatever? And actually feeling like you accomplished something, and feeling like you put a unique deck together, or you put a deck together that you're happy with. I feel like it's fairly important to find something that makes the deck unique.
Yeah, I can agree to that, but I just don't want to put the notion into people's head that they shouldn't be, if someone wants to brew the version of, mono green Storm, like the next version of Selvala, you can do that with Goreclaw, you can do that with Galta. There's so many different ways you can do it with these different commanders, that it's worth considering just to do if you want to have a fun exercise. You can still bring it to tables and it'll be fine. I mean, Mono Grain Ball is probably a good example because that deck isn't super strong, right? So a slightly worse version of a not super strong deck, you're probably not going to notice too big of a difference, depending on how big that delta is. But it's still something that there can be merit in exploring, if not just for a creative exercise.
Well, I think the point that this was trying to make is that, like, obviously it's hard to come up with, you can always come up with something that theoretically the deck does better, but, like, for example, would you ever play a Thrasios Rayhan deck? Like, I don't know maybe it's some, like, Sultai Adnaz consult brew, like it's CST, where you just swap Timna for Rayhan.
Wait, I have to come up with a farm name for this. Give me a second.
Yeah, I see.
No,
there's
no Timna. It's not a farm deck without Timna.
It's Brad Farm. Locked it in.
It's not a farm deck without Timna.
That's what it's called now.
Nope.
Can't convince me otherwise.
Like, would you just take CST, cut the white cards, and run Rayhan in place of Timna? Like, why?
Yeah, I suppose there's not really a good motivating factor for it, right?
But it's just like that's what I was getting at. Is like it's feeling satisfied with your brew. You should usually like figure out a way, basically just like to justify having built the deck.
Your justification is that your 3/3 is a great attacker.
To not trigger Timna because you dropped Timna.
Counters on stuff. Dude,
Yeah,
if
man.
you sacrifice it to a life's legacy, you can then put the counters on to a devoted druid and then use the devoted druid for extra mana.
It's prom punch, but you've just got no hasty creature. It's a food chain.
Yeah, that's a better one. Play Rayhan Ludovic food chain.
Oh,
yeah, there you go. All right, but yeah, so sort of wrapping that part of it up. Yeah, like figure out a way to be like, hey, what am I doing differently? What's my like interesting take on this? What's my creative thing that's gonna wow people when I built this deck, right? And it doesn't even necessarily have to be like a major theme. It's just like, yeah, just something that makes you want to build the deck that is unique.
And, like, I think one of the great ways to look for that, and this is what I've done with a bunch of my brews, is looking for, like, hate or stacks pieces that you can support. Like, take a deck, for example, when I was brewing, like, a Thrasios Crom sort of control-y Thrasios mana deck, I went, like, I started with the idea that I wanted a deck that could run Blood Moon type effects and also Grafdigger's Cage. And like that was the baseline for the deck, and would it have been better if I'd played something else, something with black instead of Crom? Like if I just played Thrasios Vile Smasher, like maybe, but it was like, can you play Blood Moon in Thrasios Vile Smasher? Not really. I want to see what Blood Moon does to this meta, like. So that's a good place to start looking for ideas that are different.
Yeah, and like the holy grail of this one is like humility, right?
Oh god, how
like
many humility decks have been tried?
Pretty much everybody has had their humility phase, but it's stuff like that like makes you want to brew, right? And things that like makes you satisfied with a brew that even if it's not good at the end, and even if you hate it and it's terrible, you're still sort of satisfied that you got the deck together and you sort of got the idea out into the world.
See, what terrifies me though is that one day we are going to get the humility deck, and it's going to be
just going to be the worst
it's going to be
thing
like an
ever.
Eminence commander that draws cards, and it's going to be the worst thing ever.
Yeah, making me shiver.
Yeah,
we're gonna get some like 3 mana blue-white planeswalker commander.
No, it's when we're going, guys. Clearly, it's when we go back to Theros, and they're gonna have the new cycle of gods, and there's gonna be like some 3 CMC god that's a card advantage engine. That's 3 colors.
That's actually some really interesting tension where like you have the humility play and you're like, well, I can't have too much devotion in play because I don't want my card engine to turn off, so I gotta keep my devotion down so I can keep drawing cards.
Yeah. So one point I want to emphasize before we kind of wrap this up, because we were saying, or Morgan was making the point about designing, top down from the commander, or picking the archetype first, and then, finding a commander that suits that particular archetype or strategy. There's other ways you can deck build, and maybe these aren't as common, but I know people who've come up with the name for their deck before even deciding the strategy or anything, and building from that angle.
That's middle out deck building.
It's there. All kinds of strange factors can motivate what you're doing. So and brewing at CDH isn't just limited to budget list top tier CDH. Like you can be brewing CDH in budget, right? Like there's some people who have not but completely budgetless, right? So they don't like to play with cards like LED, Mana Crypt, maybe not all the duals, but there is still a very wide space to explore there. So there is some brewing, on that aspect as well in terms of budget. So definitely something to consider.
Really? That being said, we're encouraging letting the poors into the format.
Oh god. That being said, we're probably gonna focus on mostly budgetless discussion here, or assuming that you have access to a play group that accepts proxies, or you play online in some sort of fashion.
I just wanted to point, like,
make it clear that
there are other aspects that can motivate it, and you can draw inspiration from. So
there are definitely decks like that work a lot better if everyone in your playgroup was sort of had the rule, or not the rule, but sort of the idea that they weren't playing with cards that are multiple hundreds of dollars. Then there are definitely decks that work in that sort of format that are outclassed if you play budgetless. And so you can definitely, like, people when they make budget decks often start with a non-budget deck and then just start sort of paring it down. But there is also room to explore in sort of semi-budget areas, archetypes that just don't have the cards to make it in budgetless areas.
But have I introduced you to the greatest pairing of all time, which is deck building restrictions and hackball?
Yeah.
I've heard hackball is the world's most consistent deck.
Oh, it's
literally
fantastic.
tier 0.
Yeah, dude. Oh my god, it does it all the time. I don't get it. It just always wins.
Okay. Well.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's a good summary for what can motivate a deck and your deck selection. But I think the most important area, and this is kind of clued in based off how much time we spent talking about it, is what does your deck do uniquely? So that's I think going to be the primary focus of our little advice section here, and that's because it's generally the best thing to emphasize on, right? If you just you don't want to just copy paste, like you can if you do pick, I was using the example of Damia and Thrasios Tymna and like importing some kind of base Sultai shell, like you could just copy paste over like some generic Sultai list into Damia and then call it a day. But you want to generally, when making a brew, you want to emphasize and take advantage of its unique aspects. So how do we go about doing that?
Welp, I think we should touch on deck building first. Just like getting the deck up from scratch, right? I mean, sort of like the obvious next step from like coming up with the idea. I wanted to get a piece of advice out of the way on this topic first, because I think it's something that like you really have to remember when you're brewing decks, because like even I like everybody gets carried away with this at some point, right? Everybody ignores this piece of advice, which is it's okay to not put all of your spicy ideas into a single deck as soon as you have them. Like if you have like these like all these ideas just floating around in your head the entire time, and you're just like, yeah, I'm gonna stick in I don't know, I'm gonna stick in this planeswalker shell that I've been thinking about playing, and I've been like put in all these new win cons and stuff, and I'm gonna just like, I'm gonna strip all the counter magic out of here. I'm gonna play Can Attack instead.
Yeah, I'd say the biggest reason to kind of avoid this is not that it's inherently because this is something that's not going to pan out, or it's not going to
Although
be the
a lot of the
optimal
time
design.
it won't. But
It's mainly just because if you go to test it, right? It probably increases the chances that if you're just trying a bunch of new things that it's not going to pan out. But yeah, like I'm saying, it's not to say that that's impossible. Mostly that it's going to be very hard to evaluate whether or not your spicy new changes and your unique perspective and take on it is going to be effective if you've got a million different variables to consider. Much
also,
easier to evaluate whether or not your particular unique take on something, whether or not you're just going, for instance, let's use Reed's cinnamon toast mid-range deck.
Oh yeah.
Whether or not you're just jamming a bunch of solid mid-range value cards. How does that pan out? Evaluating whether or not that pans out based off the sole inclusion of those and kind of a more standard regular shell is a lot easier than if he's also throwing in a bunch of planeswalkers and
dude, I'm gonna go into 5 color. I'm gonna make it an Embercleave deck. I'm gonna get everything into it.
Embercleave hot deck.
But yeah, also like coming at it from like another angle too, like if you try to fit all of your spice into one deck at once and like shove all of your ideas and try to fit it all into 100 cards, you're not really paying full respect to any of your ideas. Like you're just sort of like a lot of the time you're just gonna sort of end up like half-assing most of them because you just like can't focus on all of them at once, right?
This kind of goes with what I was saying about when we were talking about what's the unique aspect of your brew. If you pick something, it's much easier to maximize that unique aspect when there's only a single unique aspect to maximize, right? You're not trying to take two things and then find, some like local maximum in between, right? Where they're in like there's the optimal amount of cards in each, particular engine. That is a difficult task. Much easier to just
nobody solves that ever.
Yeah, much easier to just pick the oh wow, these are the 10 best mid-range grindy cards and call it a day.
Yeah, like I think you need to have something that makes your deck different or better in some respect or unique, but you also you don't want to have too many things because then it stops actually, like even if no one's done it before, you don't have unique aspects. You just have this like pile of cards that doesn't have if your unique aspect, typically it's going to be something that's like more extreme than any other deck. Like you went like, okay, I went even deeper down this path than any other deck. But if you start jamming in like 6 different ideas, you're not going to get deep down any of those paths because you just won't have the space.
Yeah, it could turn out that one of the ideas was actually just very solid, but you didn't invest enough
if
resources into it.
Pair it with this Flickr Super Friends package.
Yeah, like some ideas might only become fruitful after you invest a certain portion of your deck into that strategy. Mid-range cards, poor example because they're generally going to pay off for fairly low investment. People tend to splash a couple mid-range cards in most decks these days.
Yes. Well, in the online meta anyway.
Yeah, like Ristic Study is very, very splashable.
current all-star in like most decks.
But if you're, only if you're going down the humility package and you're trying to also do like, some other stuff, you might not be profiting enough off of your humility or breaking symmetry enough off of the humility for it to be worth it. So
yeah,
different things to consider.
And also, like, I think something about this, sort of just on the same path quickly, is like, don't be afraid to, like, if you didn't realize that you were working with too many things at once when you started building the deck, like, don't be scared or like try to hesitate to like just try stripping out a package if you think it's too much, or like this is too clunky, this isn't working. I'm just gonna try taking stuff out like putting more generic stuff in and seeing if I can get more out of this other thing that I want to be doing instead.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Then I think the next thing we have to talk about in deck building is staples. So you just take you have a generic list of all the different staples and you just copy paste them in when you're starting a new deck, right? Don't even think about it.
How else are you going to get all of your brews out the second after spoilers are released? Right?
Hey, we'll touch on that later. hey, you stop jumping ahead. But honestly, it's a bit of a joke, but yes, you should always start with a deck of staples in your colors.
Well, okay, but I think that people do also just to jam staples into their decks without really considering what it is the deck's trying to do and whether or not the staples actually fit in the deck.
There's tiers of staples.
There's tiers of staples for sure.
There's never a time where you can justify not running Demonic Tutor if you're in black.
We should make a staples tier list.
The staples.
Just call the episode tier list, and then sure. Demonic Tutor, Vampiric Tutor, Mana Crypt.
It's more things like the staple interaction is the one where you'll see this the most.
Activation is a staple, right? It goes in every deck.
Oh yeah, dude. My hard control deck, get it in here. I do think though that while you might not end up, and you probably won't end up keeping every staple that you start with, I do think it's a good idea to start a deck with a package of staples.
Well, but
I think
generic. You should take a look at a package of staples and then consider each one as you put it in the deck. Don't just blind copy paste.
Yeah, one advantage of doing it that way, as Morgan was saying, is that it really helps you think about the deck and the strategy you're going for. Because when it's always present in your mind, it might help you, think of other aspects of it. Also, just help you pilot better. If you're aware
of what's in your library at a given point in time.
Yeah, so for instance, with Anafenza, Raspberry Jam, my Anafenza kind of Razaketh stacks list, it runs lots of hate bears. It runs Eidolon of Rhetoric, Ethersworn Canonist for rule of law effects, but it doesn't run actual rule of law or deafening silence. Now, if I'm kind of just making importing over a generic staples list from stacks decks, there's lots of stacks decks that do run those cards in those colors. So why would I not want to do that? Now, if I'm putting in just a little bit of thought, I can think ahead and be like, oh, those cards might interfere with my main avenue to winning the game, and unlike the Eidolon of Rhetoric and Ethersworn Canonist that are creatures that I can sack to Razaketh to get rid of pretty quickly, I'm going to be stuck with a rule of law in play and deafening silence in play after I reanimate Razaketh. And after I cast my reanimation spell, there's not a whole lot I can do about rule of law unless they give me, some cycling card that can
just cycle your resounding wave. What are you, some sort of amateur?
If you guys haven't noticed yet, this entire episode is just a full excuse for Linton to justify his spice in all of his decks. We'll get there eventually. We're in the Raspberry Jam part of the episode right now.
Yeah, we've got a few more brews to come.
Oh yeah,
yeah. I think it's a pretty good example of why you should actually put a bit of thought into the staples you're porting over.
Yes, but also play your staples.
Yeah.
Play your staples.
There's no excuse to not just at least evaluate every single staple.
Oh yeah, just always evaluate all the staples. I can't stress it enough. I don't I'm gonna say the same thing so many times, but God, the amount of times I've seen people just you make a brew and it doesn't have a staple in it, and then you play the deck, you're just like, oh, this is pretty good, and then somebody's like, why don't you have the staple in it? And you're just like, well, I've been playing it without the staple, why should I have the staple in it? And you forget how good it is, and then it all goes downhill and you lose all your credibility.
I feel like the staple I always forget to include is Sylvan Library.
I 100% of the time forget to put Imperial Seal into my decks. Every time.
I just don't understand
without
how
fail.
That happens.
You know what?
Sylvan Library just doesn't fit with any of the other staple packages in my mind.
The issue is that Sylvan Library fits as an enchantment, and I know that I should always have 3 enchantments in my deck. So when I only have 2, I'm just like, oh, what's the other one? I don't know the exact number of sorceries in any given deck, and also when you type tutor into anything ever, Imperial Seal doesn't come up. So I'm just like, yeah, it's fine. We'll play Mystical Tutor, Worldly Tutor, Enlightened Tutor, Vamp Tutor.
So this is a good way to kind of some actual practical advice for deck building and brewing, and that's going to be how you're sourcing your list of staples. So as Reed kind of pointed out, we can kind of do it this way. Reed is one camp, Morgan's another, and then I'm yet another camp. Okay, so Reed how he does it from his explanation is that he's going to go onto Scryfall and he's going to look up certain keywords to generate his list. He's like, you know what? I know my deck needs tutors. It's going to go on Scryfall. I'm going to look up tutors, and I'm going to dump those into the list. And it's like, oh well, demonic tutor, all that vampire tutor, all that good stuff's going to show up easy. Call it a day for my tutors, and then move on. And
then cantrips, and then manifolds,
etc. Yeah, and
is dual land.
Morgan is going to go ahead and think of card categories more or less, and then fill those in just from memory. I'm guessing, Morgan.
Yeah, I mean, I do have lists on tapped out, but I very rarely look at them. I just kind of.
Yeah, most of us can list a lot of the staples by memory.
Yeah.
So
it happened once that I typed a deck into tapped out, and it was 100 cards with no typos. I was thrilled.
Oh wow, yeah. So myself, what I'll do is I'll go look at similar lists, either that I've brewed in the past, or someone else in the database has done. Honestly, generally, what I'll do is I'll come up with the deck idea, and then I'll go look at all my decks that have contain those colors. So when I was brewing Anafenza, I looked at Gitrog, even though those decks don't have the similar strategy at all. Coming up with a list of staples, thing about staples is they just be in almost any deck that can run those colors. So that was pretty easy to come up with all the Golgari staples that I could at least throw in and kind of evaluate after that. And then looking at, other decks, and I'll even go and look at Thrasios Timna decks, decks that have colors that aren't in my, or that contain colors that I don't contain, just so I can look at the cards that they think are the most important ones to include in your color, right? So in Thrasios Timna, after I grab my Gitrog list, I need to fill up my white staples. So if I look at Thrasios Timna lists, Silence, E-Tutor, things
so
like
basically,
that.
You just go to Pongo's Najila list and
and just pull the entire
big old pile of staples.
All right, let's take out the win cons from here. Let's take out Najila. Perfect. All right, got a list. Yeah, we're good to go.
Send it. But yeah, so there's merits to each. I will advocate for my strategy in terms of newer players. Of
course you will.
I think referencing other people's lists is the easiest way to ensure you don't have glaring omissions.
Okay, no, like sure. I agree with just like if you're new to the format, or if you're not quite comfortable in your internal encyclopedia of staples or cards that see play, just like pulling up a few lists that are close to what you want, or like are close to what you're envisioning, and just like pulling cards out of them is a great way to start a list off.
Yeah, certainly, I got my mental list of staples by like playing decks and looking at decks and playing against decks. I didn't just think of it one day and be like, these are the staples I'm going to play. That's why I put Mind Static in every deck.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add about this particular strategy. Now, I was saying, sometimes I'll look in decks that have colors I don't contain. It's also just don't purely limit yourself to looking at decks for staples or for certain things. For just the decks that are on a similar strategy, I mean, that's the surefire easiest way to do it. But if you're trying to really maximize a deck, you do want to explore. Honestly, what I'll do is I'll explore almost every deck that contains the colors I'm looking for on the deck list database, just to make sure there isn't some like, really niche strategy and deck that actually aligns very similarly with what I want, that isn't, obvious. Like there might be some weird card in Sidisi Brood Tyrant lists that has just the perfect synergy for what I'm looking for, but that the other decks have optimized out. So sometimes you will get very clever little pieces of tech that way. But that's...
Haven't the other decks just optimized out Sidisi Brood Tyrant?
Yep.
Didn't that happen?
Yep.
Yes, but we're this is not necessarily all of the Sidisi Brood Tyrant tech that might be useful for the
while we're
playing,
looking at like deck building cards as well, I sort of want to drop in a lot of the time, honestly, it's not if you're aware of it. First of all, it can be a not terrible idea to just go on Iterative and look at a commander if you're like building a specific commander, because honestly, like sometimes there's very well-known tech in more casual EDH for a commander that like you just hadn't considered, and it's actually not bad.
Yeah,
well,
like,
also on
just
EDH
like you would play.
Some of the decks are almost just because that they pull from average deck lists.
Yep.
Or they source it. They've got a little web crawler or something that's going around to all these websites pulling their decks. Now, a lot of these decks aren't, or I'm not gonna say a lot. Some of them aren't very popular in casual. So they're predominantly all the cards listed on EDH are from the competitive lists. This is something you can see if you go on the Godo page. Right? Godo is not a very popular, until Helm the Host was printed, it was like below Dao Chan on the EDH Rec mono red commanders, which is absurd.
Why? Dao Chan's great.
But so when Helm the Host came out, it more than doubled in the number of decks that it's got on EDH Rec. And so if you look there, it's largely colored by the competitive decks. So you can still, depending on the commander, it might, if you're going for something like a competitive Marin list, you're probably going to get, clouded by the casual crowd because that's one of the most popular decks. Same thing with Gitrog, but you can, depending on your commander, still get some nice CDH tech from EDH Rec. So also don't count that out.
You can go on EDH Rec and do filters to refine a little bit. Like it still won't be just a competitive deck list, but if you only look at Marin decks with a Bayou and a Mana Crypt in them, or like, I don't know, a Bayou and a Protean Hulk or whatever, pick some cards that will filter out a lot of the more casual lists. You might find that high power Marin decks are running this tech card and go, oh yeah, that, Marin's not a great example because it's such a popular deck that, the ideas are
also like fairly obvious in general.
Yeah, it's also fairly obvious, but like looking at some deck that sees some amount of play, and then filtering into things that will orient you towards more competitive brews of that list. Like not every deck with duels in it is competitive. Like the Command Zone play duels sometimes, but it will certainly orient you towards people who are playing stronger decks.
Yeah, and it exposes you to more cards and just like helps you build up an idea of what you're doing, right? Also, just once more, taking it even a step further and looking at EDH Rec, honestly, if you're like building around like weird cards like Commander or whatever, honestly, looking at decks from other formats is not a bad idea either sometimes. A lot of the time, like some of the card choices, or most of the card choices won't apply because 1v1 formats, life, all that stuff. But you can definitely look for inspiration in tech cards and like potential sleeper tech and sleeper stuff.
Look at the ban list,
deck.
The legacy ban list.
Oh yeah, look at ban lists from other formats for inspiration. But yeah, just like stuff like how like Food Chain came about in CDH, right? Like Food Chain is like a tier 3 legacy deck, and you just like people ported it over, and eventually it became Food Chain Sliver, right? Like just like looking at like potential ideas from other formats is a great way to come up for inspiration to fill out lists and come up with more ideas.
Absolutely. Now, we've got our core engine that's, the maximizing the unique aspect of our deck. We've put in our list of staples. We've got, let's say we don't have our perfect 99. Maybe we have,
but we have
plus or minus.
We have like 120-ish. We're just sitting on some extra cards. We're trying to figure it out still.
That's an interesting. Yeah, I think another thing that is something that I do when brewing decks is go over 100 cards, like just start tossing stuff in, and then when you realize you have 80 non-land cards, then go back and look at like, okay, is there a package I can cut here? Can I trim? I'm running Opt as well as Ponder Preordain and Brainstorm. Like, do I really need Opt? Look for places to trim, but don't be afraid to go over a little bit initially, just so you can sort of have all your ideas in one place and then consider them rather than, not like you have an idea, you go, oh, well, I don't think I'll have space. You leave it out and then you never come back to it.
Yeah, so the segue I was trying to make was into refining the deck. And yes. Morgan, this is a great, intro topic for the subject, because oftentimes with sculpting, what is that piece of advice? It's much easier to remove a piece of material than it is to add a piece of material.
Yeah.
Right.
Or like haircuts.
Yeah. Sculpture, haircuts, same thing. Yeah. So it's much better to start with a large selection of cards. I mean, ultimately when you're first starting brewing a deck, your deck kind of has thousands of cards in it, because you're containing, if you want to look at it that way, containing all possible combinations of cards in your colors. But once you get a manageable number of cards in your deck, somewhere like between one, I would say less than 150. 150 is a lot. But
150,
that's when you can
so
start.
Many.
I'd say less than like 120. I was
120 is like my upper
150
cap.
is what I would consider the upper bound of a brew. But once you get around there, you can start kind of whittling it down to get to the actual final nice sculpture that you would like, the nice final build of the deck. I mean, it's not going to be the final build. You're still going to have to go through. There's further things you can go through for the refining process, but this is the first major step in terms of refining the deck. So one thing I like to do, this is going to be for in terms of getting down to your 99 cards. Everyone is going to have a unique process. Well, I mean, some people are going to have the same process, but there's many different ways you can approach this. Personally, I'm kind of visual, and I like to imagine as if some people actually pull out the physical cards and maneuver them around. The closest thing to that for me is Architect. So I like going on Architect. You get to make custom categories, so you can kind of be like, oh, this is my card draw, this is my removal. And it's nice in that you can manipulate each card around, throw it in the maybe board, the sideboard. So this is kind of how I go through it. You can kind of be like, oh, this is my third tier choice, second tier choice, first tier choice, etc., etc. So that's kind of how I do it. Do you guys have any
basically
advice for this?
How I get from like 120 cards down to 100 or something like that is I pull it up on a deck list site of some sort, and then I stare at the list for a while, and then I notice that I start to hate some cards more and more as I look at them, and I'm just like, why the fuck is this in the list? God, get this out of here. I hate this. And then I take that out, and then I look at it again, and I repeat until I'm down to about 100, or maybe a bit more than 100, and then I actually have to start choosing.
Oh, one thing I would like to add to this as well is that I think it's really valuable. So when I brew these decks, I will I won't start on what is essentially going to be the final list, right? So you could have your list of 120 cards, cut it down to 99 just by removing all the other stuff, and then call it a day. What I like to do is I like to start with that. I'll make 2 copies, right? One copy is going to be the good copy. That's where I'm going to delete all my extra card choices and whatnot. But the first copy is going to be where I keep. It's basically a list of all the cards, when I was looking through Scryfall or whatever that I thought might be interesting. because it's something that when you go back, when you go to refine the deck after playing it for, getting some playtesting done, you might look back at that and be like, huh, maybe I was a bit too harsh on this card when I was first evaluating it, or there's not, there's some aspect of it I didn't realize, because it's useful to have a list of playables to go back and reference. So don't just delete all the cards that you pulled out.
I was being a bit facetious in a couple of ways, but yeah, like it's less like ripping it out of the deck entirely and more just moving it into the maybe board.
Yeah, it's always good to have a nice fat maybe board. Lots of my brews end up having like 90 card maybe boards.
I like don't use maybe boards, and I feel like I should, but I don't know. I don't know.
I feel like whenever I use maybe boards in a brew specifically, like I'll end up like adding like 40 cards to a maybe board, and then I never touch any of them ever again.
I feel like the thing that maybe boards do for me that I don't like is they make it hard for me to consider like new ideas, because like I'll think like, oh, I could try this card, and then I'm like, but I already have like 15 cards in the maybe board. If I can find a slot, I should add one of those, and then like, it makes a new card that I haven't considered before have to jump through more hurdles than a card that I have considered before, and I feel like that makes me more likely to sort of dismiss things that without fully considering them.
Yeah, so kind of the ultimate thing to say with in regards to getting down to the 99 is make sure you can justify every single card in your list. Hopefully by the time you get down to, the last 5 or 6 cards and you've got like 100, including lands, you've got like 105 card list. You should even be able to justify all the cards on the maybe board. And then it's just whichever argument is kind of wins out.
Yeah.
But you should have a very compelling reason for each card before you get to your final product.
But well, also just in general, this is sort of the stage a lot of the time when you like bring the deck to some deck server or whatever, or like you just like show it off to somebody and maybe like ask for their help, ask for opinions, even just like talking. And at the time that you're doing that, it's like you can never really find out that your justifications are weak on some cards, but I think it's like by the time you're showing it to somebody, you should have fairly solid justifications for everything.
Yeah, and this
or just be willing to change them, because sometimes that's a good approach to it too. Like you can show someone a list and be like, I don't know if I love like these 3 cards, what do you think? But yeah, don't be unwilling to cut cards that you don't actually have a solid reason to justify them.
Yeah, and this is gonna help with our kind of next topic or next subtopic, which is going to be discussion with other brewers / deck builders. Because as someone put in the show notes here, some people will not accept justifications for your card choices, no matter what the card choice is, if it's off the beaten path. So the fact that you have a strong justification for it is going to be important in terms of trying to convince other people.
Now, this definitely goes both ways. This is a very difficult balance to strike. It's easy to, and like, to be clear, I've certainly been guilty of this with brews that I've posted.
I'm fairly sure just about everybody has, right? Like,
yeah, no, yeah. I don't want to, make it seem like it's like, oh, we'll see. I understand how to do it right.
Yeah.
It's a delicate balance between figuring out what, like, when some people just don't, like, maybe they don't see it or they don't really understand what the list is doing, or they understand what the list is doing and they just don't like the idea and they don't really care whether, like, if your question is, here's the idea, do these cards work? And they don't like the idea, they'll go, no, of course the cards don't work. But you also need to not get too attached to your inclusions in your decks unless you have an incredibly solid reason. Because I've seen people, like, they have some card that they really like and you're going like, it just doesn't really seem to work. It doesn't fit with the theme. It doesn't seem that good. And like, you have to be able to take that criticism too. You know, if a lot of people are telling you to reevaluate a card, maybe that's a sign that it's not just one, you know, it's not just one person who doesn't want to accept it. Maybe take another look.
Yeah. It's like, it's something like, I think it also something about this is like learning to separate your want to play a card from your want to play a deck, and thinking about maybe the cards that I want to play don't necessarily fit in this deck that I have or this deck that I want to play, and maybe it's worth it to either cut the card out of the deck to continue working on the deck, or
I know you might think you've cracked the humility code, but I don't think you did.
Or potentially even, and like this one's rough, but I've done it a couple of times actually, is cut the deck to try to put the card somewhere else. But yeah, just like make sure that if you're attached to a card, you understand why you're attached to the card, and maybe it doesn't actually fit in the deck that you're trying to fit it in. Don't couple your want to play a card with your want to play a deck or your want to brew a deck.
Yeah, you can kind of ruin both if you're trying to force something there. You might ruin a perfectly valid brew by trying to force something where it shouldn't.
Or a nice piece of tech by putting it in a brew that makes it look bad.
Yep.
Yeah. So this is kind of feeding off of discussing with other brewers / deck builders. This is one thing that people have, and this is, I can understand where it's coming from, but some people are very protective of their brews. So they're reluctant to get others involved for the fear that it's going to become someone else's project. Or
I mean, to be fair, there's also the fear that it just becomes an absolute shit show, which does happen.
Yeah, like sometimes people might not want to, let's say someone's trying to get their first deck onto the deck list conglomerate, right? Maybe they don't want, to have 50 names stapled to it in terms of the credits section as well. So yeah, this is something that you kind of just have to get over in terms of like ego. If you want to get the optimal
God,
brew.
that was so brutal.
Yeah.
I was expecting a lot more sugarcoating of that one. Yeah.
Yeah, no, right. It's just people who have experience brewing have a lot of valid advice to offer. Now, just because someone has their name on a lot of brews on the decklist database doesn't mean they're going to be giving you the perfect advice for your brew.
Yeah, I mean, like, look at Noobs, right? He has 3 lists on the database.
And he just gives nothing but bad advice.
I was going to say Urza.
Terrible advice.
Urza is an example where there's, our friend of the show, Keegan, came out with an Urza list / primer that we showed it out, I think, 2 episodes ago. And, it deviates a fair amount from the standard Urza list. Now, if he was to go and ask the people who curate this standard Urza list, Reed, Siggy, Lurker, and Shaper, his Urza list would end up looking almost exactly like theirs, because that's how deck building advice works. If someone on the GitRog server asked me what they think, an ideal GitRog deck list should look like, I'm going to send them a link to my list, because my list isn't, something that I think is non-optimal. So you're going to get, if you're asking certain people, you're going to get decks in a certain style. So you can definitely take their advice, and not, follow it to the T. But it's definitely a good way to make sure you're considering all aspects of something, or have them. A good thing to do is, I love doing this on like the GitRog Discord, for instance, is when new players come along and they'll say, why is this run? Or, every now and then someone will bring up a card that, will trigger a massive discussion. And this is when everyone kind of puts their best argument forward for a certain card. That's really where I think, arriving at specific card choices is best done, instead of just, Reed lists a card from Urza and he's like, yep, this should just be in your list. You should be running Legacies Allure no matter what. I'm sorry you think it's a bad card. Just run it. You know, making sure that he's defending his card choice is
card. Being put on blast. It kind of seems like you're being put on
Jesus
blast.
Christ.
Yeah, making sure
so
he
much
can
latent
actually
hostility.
making sure he can actually defend the card choice to a level that you find satisfactory,
which I can.
Your list is important.
Before anybody asks, I can. You could ask me at DMs. It's fine.
But yeah, so taking people's advice, you know, getting advice from people who aren't building that particular deck, but maybe something adjacent, and also kind of just trusting your gut and doing some actual play testing is a good way to arrive at something that might be a unique approach, and you might find something that other people overlooked.
Now, on the topic of playtesting, because there is something that you can do pre-playtesting, because I think we've sort of talked about playtesting before in the context of like picking up new decks and like sort of brewing. So we might be treading over like retread ground, but we can touch it in a bit. But something you can do before playtesting a new brew that is actually very, very good at refining a list is literally just drawing hands from the sample list. I know Tapped Out has that functionality. I think Architect has it. Like, you just load it onto something, load it onto Cockatrice, whatever. Sleeve up proxies for a brew. And honestly, just drawing hands from a deck and like not even necessarily goldfishing, although you can be great in just revealing like sources of clunkiness or things that you didn't necessarily think about in like thinking about how a hand's going to play out, or thinking about, hey, like I thought this card was going to be good, but like just from drawing it in these hands, like, wow, I can't look at a hand that I have it in and find a way that I want to cast it, right? And also just with, drawing sample hands too is also a thing that you can do in tandem with drawing sample hands. Also in real games as well, though, testing games is a thing, again, something I believe we've talked about on the podcast before. If not, I endorse this all the time. So you probably heard me talk about this if you're on any Discord ever. But just doing A/B testing, basically, where when you're thinking about potentially a card, you have like your list of like 5 cards that are on the cutting block, or like you want to like fit some cards into the deck and are thinking about potential cuts or whatever, just like trying to find space for stuff. Doing games or hands where you pick one of the cards that you were potentially going to swap out and just basically just like watching it and just monitoring it. And whenever you draw it, just think about, if this was one of the other cards that I'm considering, where would I be in this game? Like what would the state of this game look like? Would I rather have it in my hand? Would it still be as bad here? Is this card that I have in my hand really good? Would I rather have one of the other ones? And it can really help you sort of narrow down cards that you actually want in your deck, right?
Yeah, so one thing, is actually a great resource in terms of an example of how this is done. My friend from the Godo Discord, insert clever phrase here, has a YouTube channel where he actually uploaded videos of him doing like A/B testing for Godo. So you can actually see like someone in the live process, how they go through this, like what he's thinking for all of these things, all of these choices, and the actual process for going through it. So for those of you who've never done this sort of thing before, we'll link that in the description. And this is just, I mean, it's going to be, it's a bit boring to watch someone else do some A/B testing for a deck that you don't play, but just to kind of understand the process for it, this is a good resource you can use to kind of emulate that for your own deck.
Now, I will say, I think if it's the link I'm thinking of, it's definitely it's more intensive than what you really need to do. Like, he first of all, he played games with both the cards in question, which was, what was it, Metalworker and
Kuldotha? No, I don't know. He's done this a few times. I can't remember the exact one.
Well, anyway, so he'd take 2 cards and he'd goldfish like many, many hands with both of them, and that's definitely more intensive than you need to be. And also, you don't always find a card in your opener, right? I think one of the interesting aspects of a card, including in your deck, is like how often you go to tutor for it as well. Obviously, depending on the type of card. Like, you're not going to tutor for Counterspell very often. That doesn't mean you don't run Counterspell.
Are you implying that I wouldn't tutor for a tutor? You're out of your mind.
But when you are like, when you're just playing a game, think about like, okay, you're casting a tutor. You know, maybe it's a stacks piece. You were considering, you wanted to try and fit some stacks piece in your deck, and you went like, it doesn't seem quite good enough. I'm just going to play like Ponder or Preordain. I didn't have a Preordain on my list. I'm going to play Preordain. Like, when you cast that tutor, you know, you can think like, okay, well, if this card was, I don't know, Suppression Field. If this Preordain was Suppression Field, like, would I want to find it off this tutor? Like, would that be something that's good? It's not just about when you draw it, because certain cards behave differently in games. Like, rather than just they do different things when you cast them, you know, you try and find them at different times. You have different ways of accessing them. You place different priorities on deliberately trying to access them. So, just thinking about that when you're trying to evaluate how a card you think might be in your deck.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, and just the final point before we wrap this up is that just play testing and with hands and doing A/B testing, goldfishing, this can give you ideas about places that you might want to go harder on, as Reed put it in this little note, on spice, but just, you know, in general, the unique engine or aspect of your deck that you just want to emphasize more. It's just, you know, maybe you might not have committed enough to that actual game plan, and through testing you can kind of that kind of becomes obvious. So that's just something that you can pick up from goldfishing and A/B testing.
Yeah, it's not like, as much as brewing might seem like it a lot of the time, when you end up gravitating toward 4 or 5 color meta ball, refining a deck isn't always just about turning it into a pile of staples gradually and stripping out all the spice out of it, right? Like, it's turning spice into established strategies, right? So like, sometimes that does just mean like, sometimes you need more spice. Sometimes you need to swap up your spice a bit, or like just like turn things a bit spicier. Go a bit brewier.
Yeah. Okay, and with that, it's time to get into everyone's favorite segment, Gut Check.
Get check.
Gut check.
Oh, Morgan didn't give the deflated gut check voice this time.
Okay, Lyndon, you have to do an ASMR gut check now.
Gut check ASMR. Well,
Do I?
this
I don't
week,
think that's-
it's not myself who came up with the gut check. It's actually Morgan who came up with the gut check. So
Yeah, it is.
Got outsourcing labor.
I know. I don't
What a
get to have
monopolist.
my like awesome
You
advantage.
had one job, and yet. All right. So, the question is as follows. What card do you believe people most often tutor for when they shouldn't, with hidden tutors and revealed tutors?
2 separate answers?
2 separate answers.
Oh god. I had my like first answer. Yeah. Hidden. Yeah, okay. I've got mine.
Yeah, we're good. We're good.
We're good?
Yeah.
All right. Who wants to kick things off?
I'll kick things off. My answers, I feel this is why I don't like being on this side of the gut check. I love putting thought into my answers. Oh well, okay. So my first answer is going to be with most of the time it's not super unique in terms of hidden tutors, but most often you'll see like a
Spit
demonic
it out.
tutor or vampiric tutor, imperial seal for an early game mana crypt, and they really should be going for an early game soul ring. It's such a lame answer, but people die to their mana crypt triggers all the time.
Hyper tiny optimization on the early game fast mana tutor.
And then the other answer for revealed tutors is interaction. People mystical tutor for force of will, which
God
I
damn
think
it.
is the wrong It's just
See,
wrong
okay,
so
the
many
thing is,
times.
I'm angry about that because I thought I was gonna get Morgan on that one because I think that's Morgan's answer too. But Lyndon got to it before both of us.
Was that where? Oh, you were gonna say that as well. Okay, Reed, what's yours?
I think hidden tutor, or sorry, yes, hidden tutor. I think hidden tutors people probably make mistakes. Tutoring for usually like stacks pieces is the big one that I see. Is like even like you'll tutor for something with a hidden tutor, and like people will get like a restant piece or something, but other people at the table will be like, oh, they got a combo piece. Well, now we have to respect this all the time, and it just like makes it way like it makes it so much less likely for you to actually land the stacks piece because people are like, well, like you obviously got a combo piece, so we're gonna have to deal with that at some point. And then hidden tutor is, I would also have to say interaction, or revealed tutor. I would also have to say interaction because revealing that you have a counterspell to the table just immediately puts the onus of interaction on you.
Yeah,
it's just not a good time ever.
Tutor a force of will, unless you're literally right about to combo and you don't have like the mana, like if you don't have the mana for like something like a Fluster Storm or whatever. If you find a force of will and you're not trying to protect your combo going off immediately, you are going to get wrecked. Someone's going to cast something that needs to be countered. God. Everyone's going to look to you, and then you're going to exile. You're going to cast your force of will, and you're going to exile a card from your hand. So yeah, that one's pretty rough.
Or Morgan, what you got?
Well, first, I did also get Matt's answers. He couldn't be live with us, but he is alive. So I asked him, and his answer for revealed tutors was force of will, just like everybody else. And he apparently didn't really have a good answer for hidden tutors.
Wow, we're caught out.
So I think for revealed tutors, yeah, I have to go with interaction, particularly interaction that is very effective at stopping other people. You can get, like, you know, one of the things that you can get that's interaction is like a Veil of Summer. Because, yeah, now, you know, when you are ready to go off, that protects you, but people can't lean on the fact that you have Veil of Summer to stop somebody else from winning. And I think that one of the things people most often incorrectly tutor for is wheels.
Interesting. Okay. Let's hear it. What's your justification?
Yeah.
My justification is that, like, obviously, if you're just tutoring a wheel and then casting it, fine. But I think that a lot of people assume wheels will resolve on their next turn cycle, when they often won't. Like, I think people aren't great at evaluating how threatening other people find their wheels. And so I've seen people, you know, they play out a bunch of mana and then they tutor, and you go like, well, they got a wheel and they have 2 cards in hand and 6 mana on turn 3. I don't think I'm going to let them resolve that wheel. Like,
I'll also say that people who tutor wheels, the value of a wheel can change drastically in a turn cycle.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yes.
Everyone dumps their hand. Everyone's just sitting at, like, you know, 1 or 2 cards. You're sitting at like 1 or 2 cards plus a wheel. If you cast that wheel, you're just gassing everyone up. So you've just like wasted a tutor on something that now is just super low EV to cast. So
I've definitely
I like that point. Good point.
Had hands where I'm like, yeah, I'll just go like turn 1, you know, land dork, turn 2, land like wheel. And then somebody goes like land, crypt, signet, carpet, and you're like,
wow, great.
Don't know how I feel about this wheel.
Okay, I'm looking forward to what other people have to say in terms of gut check answers.
Yeah, this one's definitely an interesting
one
to see what people respond when we put this up.
Okay, and before we wrap up the show, we've got a couple listener questions. So this one comes from Chelky. Do you think budget decks can ever really be CDH, or is making a deck building decision for reasons outside of the game inherently against the spirit of the format? On a related note, how would you like the etiquette around playing decks that aren't strictly worse than established decks, but mostly are?
I kind of want to take these. I kind of want to take these in reverse order and start with the etiquette of playing decks that aren't strictly worse. And I think, like, for me, as long as your deck, like, it doesn't have to be, as good as the existing decks. There are certain expectations, though. And I think that decks that aren't great but somewhat meet those expectations are fine, even if they really don't actually belong at the table. Like, one of the big ones is just the interaction that you play. Like, I've seen some decks where it's like the person's playing mono blue, and they have some card advantage commander. It's like Azami, and it's like, oh, I don't play counter spells. You're like, okay, well, if you're showing up here completely not expecting to deal with any of the sort of threats that you're going to face at this table, I don't really think that's cool. And like, those decks sometimes work. Like, I've lost to just random mid-range casual decks because they're just over there dirtling while you're like, everyone's just answering each other, and they're like playing random creatures and attacking. But I don't think that really enhances the game if they're not able to answer any sort of the threats that they're expecting.
Yeah, I sort of, well, not even sort of, I definitely agree with that as well. Like, if you're bringing a janky deck, or like just like a deck that is not classically considered good, like, you should still be taking on some of the responsibility of playing a game of CDH, and not just being like an empty seat at the table, right?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes that can't be helped. Like, if someone's like got like they're playing a new mono black Sidisi equivalent, right? Like, when Godo was first spoiled, it was like very all in. Just every single ritual, fast mana, just nothing, no stacks or almost no stacks. And in that case, you know what? Sometimes when you're testing something out, if it's jank, just to see if it works, you can't always be there for interaction. You can't always be counted on for interaction. But
the all-in Godo decks were threatening wins on turn 3 or 4 with reasonable regularity. Like, that's also that the Glass Cannon combo deck is a part of CEDH. Like, it's not particularly well placed right now, which is why you don't see a lot of Selvala or Grenzo or whatever.
Yeah.
But, like, being relevant in the early game somehow is an expectation on CEDH decks. Maybe it's interaction, maybe you're threatening to win.
Yeah.
But, if you're just playing, like, some random
Muldrotha deck that has no interaction.
Sure, or like I know you're not talking about me, because mine definitely does.
You run interaction.
Like, if you're just playing some random, like, cultivate on turn 3 into 5-drop commander on turn 4 into, like, some mid-range beater creature tap out on turn 5 kind of thing, like, you aren't really participating. You're just, like, it seems pretty clear to me at that point that your objectives aren't the same as everyone else in the game, and that can be really frustrating.
So nice. It's gonna be a nice double feature question, because that covers the second question, and then the first question, which I'll read again, is: do you think budget decks can ever really be CDH, or is making a deck building decision for reasons outside of the game inherently against the spirit of the format?
I feel like it's really about external restrictions, personally. I feel like, for the most part, for like almost every reason why you would build a budget deck, right? Like, it's pretty much always going to be acceptable, because it's just like, well, yeah, you don't have the money to afford real decks. Not like most people don't, for CDH, very expensive format. You might as well, like, play to the best that you can if you're not allowed to use proxies, all that stuff. But I feel like where it crosses the line for me personally is, like, if it's fully accepted that you can play whatever power you want, maybe it's proxies, maybe it's online, whatever, and your personal philosophy is to not play proxies, at that point I think you're sort of bringing down, or like you're your goals aren't the same as everybody else who's there to play the format.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because I would say that inherently budget decks are not. That they're fine. They are CDH. Budget decks. There's nothing inherent about a budget deck that makes it not CDH. For instance, like if you're playing a budget TNT deck, no duels, but maybe you've got shocks, and maybe you can't have a mana crypt, but you've got you can compensate. You're still probably better than some of the budgetless fringe decks, right? So the power level is there. Like, we consider the budgetless fringe decks as part of CDH, right? CDH has as much as people like to gripe about tier lists, there are pretty definitive tiers, right? So you can still be a budget top tier deck and not be like the very bottom of the bottom. But as Reed pointed out, this is mostly something that should be there when it's necessary. If there is no actual budget restriction, in terms of like you just don't have access to cards and you can't play proxies, or this isn't like a CDH budget league or something like that, then you really should be trying to play at the highest power level possible. Otherwise, you are affecting the other players in the pod. Regular EDH has a social contract, and a lot of that's like, don't play MLD and things like that. But CDH also does have a social contract, which is we expect to play games at the highest level, or, approximately something like that. And you need to have a good reason to contravene that.
So I have kind of a different take, and I feel like it's because I think there are sort of two definitions of CDH that most people will often, like, one person will actually use both of them in different contexts and in different discussions. So I think that to a degree, like, if you were taking sort of the strict definition of CDH, then that would be a very small number of decks and like no budget restrictions. The bottom of that list, like this is like the best, I don't know, 5 to maybe 8 like decks in the
10,
format.
Maybe, yeah,
maybe 10 if we're being generous. Decks in the format would be sort of the strict definition, and I think that, yes, putting a budget list against sort of the budget list top of the format, that would be sort of against the spirit of that. But I think that there's also a much broader definition that includes like just a huge whack of stuff. Like, I probably have a much broader definition of what is sort of the broad CDH than most people, that just includes a huge number of lists, some of which, yeah, even as Lyndon said, even when fully built, are never going to match like some budget, I don't know, budget CST or budget Hulk decks. If you fully build out like my forever pet deck of Mizzix, like, would I rather play budget CST or fully built Mizzix? If I was trying to win, probably I'd pick budget CST, but certainly I think that when you're brewing a deck, you need to decide what you're doing with this deck. And if the idea is, I want to make this deck like cutthroat competitive, win as much as possible, then you should probably brew the deck as if you have no budget restrictions. And it's fine to brew a deck with no budget restrictions and then play the deck with budget restrictions as well. Like, obviously there's secondary brewing to bring it down to your budget limits, but take the idea as budgetless and then make a budget version. But I think that if your idea is, look, I want to play a deck that's, relevant really early, and I'm playing it against other competitive decks with the sort of competitive mentality, but, it's fun and not super, like, we're not all just jamming like the best 5 net decks, then sure, budget list away. And I don't think anyone should ever be, like, if anyone ever shames anyone or insults them or anything like that for playing budget options, like, screw that. That's never okay.
I'm also not a huge fan of people trying to enforce no proxies. Like from an LGS level, I kind of get it, right? You know, some LGSs or some of them might have, you know, oh, you can only run like 3 proxies or something like that.
But also like there's a real consequence.
I'm not a huge
from
fan of like, yeah, someone spends a bunch of money on the format and it's like, well, you know, I spent all this money, but so you should have to as well. Like that's, yeah, that kind of goes against the CDH mentality to me, which is wanting to play against the highest powerful, the highest tiered decks in powerful. If you're just wanting to start off with a massive handicap, it kind of just feels like a pub stomping mentality. Like you just enjoy having an unfair advantage.
Yeah. Now, obviously, the counterpoint to that is, like, you know, the counterpoint is that it certainly feels unfair if you, like, went out of your way to save money and you know, you decided to forego other things that you might have wanted to buy these cards, to have somebody else just print them off. Like, I understand why that, you know, is upsetting to people. And I think we've mentioned this before, although I think it's been a while since we've talked about proxies. You know, my view is you shouldn't approach Magic with the idea that you aren't spending money on it. But not everyone, like, there are people who can't save money faster than Time Twister gains value.
Yes.
So, you know, if you're spending sort of what you can reasonably spend on Magic, then you're like, that's completely fine by me. But I do the idea of, well, I'm just going to play for free because everyone else is paying into the system. Like, I see why that bothers some people.
Yeah. Anything else on this listener question, or should we move on to our final listener question?
Let's move on to the final listener question.
All right. This comes from patron Mortality 18. You can play an early Praetor's Grasp. You are playing against a table of tier 1 decks. Which deck do you choose? Which card do you take?
Well, I think the first question is, why am I playing Praetor's Grasp?
That's a very good question. Yeah.
But being realistic,
I'm not a huge fan of this card. Yeah.
If I am in the situation where I'm playing an early game Praetor's Grasp against a table of a bunch of really good decks, that would logically conclude from that means that I'm probably playing overalls for some reason or another. And
sure.
Tier 1 deck at the table realistically means there's at least one Hulk deck at the table. Realistically also in 4 color, which means I am putting the Praetor's Grasp at the Hulk player and taking their flash. Thank you very much.
All right. So my answer for this, and it's kind of Reed's answer, even if it's joking, but does contain sort of useful advice, which is you should be tutoring for something that proactively helps your own strategy. You should not be using Praetor's Grasp as a 3-mana extract. That is just a losing play. Like, oh wow, you made the Gitrog player lose the game by Praetor's Grasping their deck more. Hooray. Like, that doesn't advance you closer to winning the game.
No, that makes you a winner. It doesn't even matter what the outcome of the game is. That makes you a winner.
Yeah. So one thing, like, if you're an ad nauseum deck, you know, taking someone else's ad nauseum stops them from being able to do that. Well, it's also relevant that you target the appropriate player. If you're at a table of Gitrog, Cass, and Zur, right? You know, probably take the Zur's ad nauseum, because they've got Ad nauseam Angel's Grace, and it's a much more important part of their plan than it is something like the Gitrog players' ad nauseum. So
I feel like I'd take Kess's ad nauseum there, because Zur has Necropotence anyways, like, much more consistently.
But the point is, you pointed at the Zur, politic them into thinking that you took the ad nauseum, and they swing with Zur and realize you took their Necro. No, what did you do to my deck?
Yeah, and so there's that, and then also, like, if there's a Tainted Pact or Consult deck, if you're a Tainted Pact or Consult deck, taking, I'd probably target, instead of targeting another Tainted Pack consult deck because there's redundant copies, or there's redundant, it's like, they're redundant pieces, taking it out of something like Food Chain First Sliver, where it's like a double tutor or something like that. That's, and you also take the Tainted Pack to make them sweat, because when they cast consult, they can just lose the game. Things like that. Like, yeah, I don't know. There's small little ways you can optimize it.
Oh my god! Wait, that just.
I think also one facet of this question that I don't think either of you really discussed is it does say you can play an early Praetor's Grasp.
Oh yes.
When you're playing against a table of tier 1 decks, and I think that often it is actually like just sort of randomly Praetor's Grasping, or randomly tutoring, randomly extracting someone is very not great. And even randomly tutoring is not always the correct play. Like, it may just be appropriate to hold it until later. When maybe the Flash Hulk player tried to go off and, like, some other pieces are in their bin, and you can go like, okay, you know what, maybe I don't actually need to target the Flash Hulk player for whatever it is I'm getting. I can target somebody who's a little bit more threatening, or something like that. Just the later you're casting it, the more information you have. And always take Chain Veil face down, because dream crushing.
By the way, just before we finish up, I did want to say, because I'm always looking for new ways to BM. Lyndon, your idea of taking stuff from the free chain player just gave me the best idea for counter BM ever, which is when you're on a consult deck and you're going to win through consult, and this with demonic consultation and something, when somebody Praetor's grasps you and still has the card in exile, the most BM thing ever is to name the card that you think they took with the console. And just call it.
Yeah. Not even resolve a tutor, just know it.
No, just know exactly what they took. Yeah. You're just like, I just look them in the eyes and name Mana Crypt off of Demonic Consultation.
Yeah, you're transparent to me. Yeah, that's good BM.
But yeah, like I think people find it funny to do the face down extract thing, but I think that's
it's pretty much always wrong.
The only time it's correct,
I can take your food chain face down. Screw you.
The only time it's correct to extract like a Dakmor or food chain or something is when you're playing food chain First Sliver and you've already tutored all your cast from exile creatures and you have a spare extract in your hand. That's when it's appropriate to do that. Otherwise, you
could also use Praetor's Grasp as extract when you're looping it infinite numbers of times in a turn. That's also good.
Hopefully that's what you're doing with this deck, because otherwise, why is there a Praetor's Grasp?
Yeah, really. Hey, dude,
I think there's almost always better win cons than looping a Praetor's Grasp.
I'm gonna give you the spice. When you're playing a non-blue Hulk deck in a Hulk heavy meta, you play the Praetor's Grasp so you can take the other deck's flash, so you can have your own flash.
Why am I playing a non-blue Hulk deck?
Because sometimes you just gotta do what you gotta do, you know what I mean?
Do you?
Sometimes it'd be like that.
Why am I playing a non-blue Hulk deck with a Praetor's Grasp? I have questions.
I know, it's sometimes people don't think it'd be like that, but it
do.
Okay.
Isn't it people don't think it'd be like it be, but it do? Anyways.
Whatever. That wraps it up for this episode. If you guys would like to reach out to us with any questions, comments, or concerns, you can contact us on Twitter at Into the North Pod, via our email, intothenorthpodcast@gmail.com, or on our Discord server, the invite link for which can be found in the description for this episode. Extra special thanks to all of our patrons who help cover the expenses for our show and allow us to work towards improving the quality of the podcast. If you too would like to become a patron, we are at patreon.com/intothenorthpodcast. Thank you as always to the band Vox Cadre for our lovely podcast music, to Nate Slover for our equally lovely podcast logo, and to our long-suffering podcast editor Roadkill. Next episode will be out in 2 weeks. Until then, see ya.
Bye.
See ya.